My name is Arthur Bennett, and for 46 years, I have lived a life built on the quiet principles of Willow Creek, Oregon. This town, nestled amongst the green embrace of the Cascades, has always been my sanctuary. My home, a modest craftsman house with a wide porch and a backyard that spilled into a carefully curated landscape, was more than just bricks and mortar. It was a testament to the peace I cherished. I am a landscape architect, you see, a profession that demands patience, an eye for detail, and a deep respect for nature's gentle artistry. My days were spent sketching designs, selecting native plants, and overseeing the transformation of barren plots into vibrant, living spaces. My hands, though not calloused, carried the subtle strength of someone who understood the earth. Evenings, after the last client call faded, belonged to Sylvie, my wife. Sylvie, with her elegant French accent and an even more elegant spirit, brought a certain genie-size quoi to our quiet lives. We would sit on our porch, often with a glass of local Oregon Pinot Noir, listening to the cricket's symphony and watching the sun dip behind the distant fir trees. The world outside our fence line seemed to hum with a gentle rhythm, a melody of tranquility that I had cultivated over decades. People in Willow Creek knew me as an even-keeled man, a good neighbor, perhaps a little too agreeable at times. I was the one who always offered a helping hand, the one who tried to see the best in everyone, even when faced with minor annoyances. Conflict was something I avoided like a stubborn weed in a prize-winning garden. My philosophy was simple. If you cultivate peace within yourself and your immediate surroundings, it will inevitably spread outward. I believed in polite discourse, in understanding, in the quiet resolution of differences. This inherent nature of mine, while fostering a serene existence, had also earned me a reputation, a subtle, unspoken label as someone who would bend rather than break, someone who might take a lot of nonsense rather than cause a fuss. It wasn't something I was proud of, but it was a part of who I was. I just preferred harmony over anything else. My garden, which was not just a collection of plants but a living artwork, was my escape, my personal meditation space. I'd spent countless hours nurturing every shrub, every flower, every patch of verdant lawn. The scent of damp earth after a light rain, the buzz of a busy bee among the lavender, the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze, these were the sensory delights that defined my peaceful world. Sylvie often teased me, saying I knew more about the emotional needs of a rose bush than most people knew about their own family, and she was probably right. Our evenings were sacred, especially in the warmer months. We'd often eat dinner al fresco, just the two of us, enjoying the cool evening air and the soft glow of our string lights. We'd talk about our day, or simply sit in comfortable silence, listening to the distant hoot of an owl or the trickle of the stream that bordered our property a few hundred yards away. This was my world, meticulously crafted, cherished, and utterly, wonderfully calm. And then the moving trucks arrived next door. It happened on a Tuesday, a day that had started with the promise of gentle sunshine and a productive morning in my studio. The house next to ours had been vacant for months, its previous owner, a sweet elderly lady, having moved to be closer to her grandchildren. We had enjoyed the quiet, the expansion of our own little bubble of peace. I had even imagined what kind of new neighbors might move in, perhaps another quiet couple, a young family, maybe someone with a love for gardening we could share. What arrived, instead, was a seismic shift. The trucks weren't just numerous. They were enormous, blocking the narrow street, their diesel fumes tainting the crisp Willow Creek air. The first sign of trouble wasn't the noise of moving furniture, which is to be expected, but the sheer volume of voices. Shouting, not talking, shouting, punctuated by what sounded like heavy objects being thrown rather than carried. Within hours, the serene quiet that had blanketed our neighborhood for so long was ripped apart. The new family, the Johnsons, as I soon learned, wasted no time in establishing their presence. They weren't quiet movers. They were an explosion of sound and chaotic energy. Children, not just one or two, but at least three, perhaps four, seemed to emerge from the moving vans like a troop of wild animals, instantly claiming the previously manicured lawn as their personal jungle gym. Their screams, a piercing, high-pitched cacophony, began almost immediately. These weren't the joyful, innocent cries of children playing a harmless game of tag. These were primal, nerve-rattling shrieks, sustained for minutes on end, the kind that made the hair on your arms stand up and your teeth ache. It felt less like play and more like a constant, unceasing test of endurance. Sylvie and I exchanged worried glances, trying to reassure ourselves that it was just the chaos of moving in, that things would settle down. But they didn't. As dusk approached, and the moving crew finally departed, a new sound emerged, one that would become the anthem of our shattered peace: music. But not just any music. This was a pounding, bass-heavy, relentlessly repetitive thumping that vibrated through the very foundations of our home. It was what I could only describe as trashy rap music, filled with explicit lyrics about violence, drugs, and crass acts, yelled at full volume. And it wasn't coming from inside their house. It was blasting from massive outdoor speakers, positioned ominously close to our shared fence line. These weren't subtle background speakers. These were concert-grade monstrosities, designed to fill an arena, not a suburban backyard. The lyrics, clear even over the thumping bass, were an assault on everything I valued. Pussy, dick, drugs, steal, kill. It was vile, aggressive, and utterly inescapable. They were doing karaoke, it seemed, shouting along to these offensive anthems, their voices adding another layer of raw, untrained volume to the already unbearable din. I tried to maintain my composure. "They'll quiet down," I told Sylvie, more to convince myself than her. "It's their first night, they're excited." But the music continued, well past 10 o'clock, past 11, past midnight. Sleep became a luxury, a restless, fitful attempt to block out the invading noise. The next day was a repeat, and the next, and the next. Every evening, like clockwork, the music would start, often right as I was settling down for my evening meal with Sylvie. The children's screams would punctuate our daylight hours, making working from my home office impossible, turning my peaceful garden into a sonic battleground. My tranquility was no longer merely disrupted. It was utterly obliterated. My careful routines, my sense of calm, my very peace of mind, were eroding with each thumping beat. I found myself snapping at Sylvie over minor things, a rare occurrence for me. My concentration at work suffered. The delicate lines of my landscape designs blurred into a chaotic mess in my mind. The quiet rhythm of Willow Creek had been replaced by a jarring, incessant clamor. The problem was clear, massive, and directly over my fence. I was trapped in my own home, my sanctuary turned into a sonic prison. The Johnsons, my new neighbors, had emerged as an undeniable nemesis, a force of chaos threatening to consume my entire world. After a full week of this relentless assault, my patience, a quality I prided myself on possessing in abundance, finally frayed to a thin, brittle thread. I couldn't endure another night of that vulgar noise, another day of those grating screams. My usually calm demeanor was replaced by a simmering anger, unfamiliar and unsettling. I knew I had to do something. My first instinct always was to be reasonable, to approach the problem with politeness and a genuine desire for mutual understanding. That evening, as the first bass notes began to thud through the twilight, I took a deep breath, straightened my shirt, and walked around to their front door. Sylvie watched me from our porch, a worried look on her face. I rang the doorbell, and after a moment, a large, burly man with a scowl etched onto his face opened it. He had a beer in one hand, and the sound of the music seemed to emanate directly from his pores. "Good evening," I began, my voice carefully modulated to convey friendliness, not accusation. "I'm Arthur Bennett, your neighbor from next door. Welcome to Willow Creek." He grunted, his eyes narrowed, giving me a once-over that felt less like an appraisal and more like a challenge. "Yeah." He drawled, his voice rough. "Look, I know you're just settling in," I continued, trying to maintain my polite facade, "but the music, it's quite loud, and it's been going on pretty late every night. Would you mind terribly, perhaps, keeping it down after 10 o'clock? We tend to turn in a bit earlier here in the evenings, and the sound really carries." I offered a small, hopeful smile, expecting a nod of understanding, perhaps an apology. Instead, his eyes flickered to someone behind him in the dimly lit hallway. A woman, equally burly, with a sneer that mirrored his own, appeared beside him. They exchanged a look, and then, to my utter disbelief, they both started to laugh. It wasn't a friendly laugh, or even an amused one. It was a derisive, dismissive cackle that seemed to mock my very existence. The man even turned his head slightly, as if speaking to someone else, and mumbled something in a language I didn't understand, though the tone was clearly contemptuous. He then turned back to me, still smirking. "You got a problem, old man," he snarled, his voice radiating hostility. My smile faltered. My carefully constructed politeness cracked. "No, not a problem, I stammered, taken aback by their utter lack of decency. But he cut me off, simply staring at me with a blank, challenging gaze. The woman laughed again, louder this time. They stood there, blocking their doorway, their faces radiating arrogance, not even bothering to offer a verbal response. They just looked at each other, laughed, and then the man slowly, deliberately, began to close the door in my face. I stood there, utterly mortified, the thumping bass of their music feeling like a physical blow against my chest. The door clicked shut, leaving me alone on their porch, the stench of stale beer and their blaring music the only remnants of my failed attempt at civility. My face burned with humiliation. I had gone to them as a polite neighbor, seeking common ground, and they had treated me with utter contempt, laughing in my face, dismissing me as if I were a bothersome fly. That walk back to my own porch felt like walking through treacle. My shoulders slumped, and the knot of anger in my stomach tightened into a hard, cold ball. Sylvie was still there, her face a mask of concern. She didn't need to ask, my expression told her everything. "They laughed at me, Sylvie," I said, my voice barely a whisper, filled with a raw hurt I hadn't felt in years. "They just laughed." It was more than just a failed conversation. It was a direct assault on my character, on my willingness to be reasonable. It confirmed their nature. They were not just loud, they were deliberately disrespectful, arrogant, and clearly believed they could do whatever they wanted, regardless of the impact on others. My old self, the one who took a lot of nonsense, was screaming at me to just retreat, to ignore it, to find a way to cope. But something else, a new, harder kernel, was beginning to form inside me. The problem had not been solved. It had been magnified, made personal. My home was no longer just noisy. It was under siege, and my dignity had been publicly trampled. The battle for peace had begun, and I realized, with a chilling certainty, that the polite Arthur Bennett might not be enough to win it. Act 2. They try to solve the problem but fail, making it worse. The humiliation of that first confrontation festered within me, a bitter taste that lingered long after the sound of their mocking laughter had faded. It wasn't just the noise anymore. It was the utter disregard, the contempt they had shown. My resolve hardened, but my initial approach remained rooted in the principles I had always held dear: reason, law, and order. I would try everything by the book, meticulously, leaving no stone unturned in my quest to reclaim our peace. The next day, I delved into the local ordinances of Willow Creek. I spent hours online, poring over municipal codes, specifically searching for anything related to noise pollution, quiet hours, and public nuisance. I found what I was looking for: a clear statute stating that loud, disturbing noise was prohibited between the hours of 10:00 p.m. and 7:00 a.m. There were provisions for repeated offenses, for noise exceeding a certain decibel level, and even for noise that could be considered injurious to the health or welfare of citizens. Armed with this knowledge, I decided on my next course of action. I would not engage with them directly again, not after their outright rudeness. This time, I would involve the authorities. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the first telltale thumps of the bass began to emanate from next door, I started a detailed log. I recorded the date, the exact time the music started, an estimate of its volume, and a brief description of the lyrics I could make out. I noted every instance of the children's incessant screaming during the day, too, adding to my growing dossier of grievances. My phone became a constant companion, ready to record. At precisely 10:05 p.m., when the music showed no signs of abating, I called the non-emergency line for the Willow Creek Police Department. I explained the situation calmly, citing the noise ordinance, emphasizing the repeated nature of the disturbance, and mentioning my prior, unsuccessful attempt to speak with the neighbors. The dispatcher was polite, assuring me they would send an officer to investigate. We waited. The music continued its relentless assault. 20 minutes later, a patrol car pulled up in front of the Johnsons' house. I watched from my living room window, a flicker of hope igniting in my chest. An officer, a young man I didn't recognize, walked up to their front door. He spoke to them for a few minutes. I couldn't hear what was being said, but I saw the Johnsons gesturing dismissively, their expressions still arrogant. The officer then returned to his car and drove away. Within 5 minutes of the officer's departure, the music, which had briefly quieted to a barely audible hum, suddenly roared back to life, louder than before, as if in defiant protest. It was a clear, unmistakable act of escalation. They weren't just ignoring the police, they were openly mocking them, and by extension, mocking me. The thumping bass seemed to pound directly into my skull, a headache blooming behind my eyes. Sylvie looked at me, her face etched with despair. "They don't care, Arthur," she said, her voice soft but filled with a profound weariness. "They truly do not care about anyone but themselves." The music continued until well past midnight, proving her point with every jarring beat. My sleep that night was non-existent, filled with restless tossing and turning, my mind racing with frustration and a growing sense of helplessness. The next day, I escalated again. I called the police non-emergency line once more, reporting the retaliatory increase in volume immediately after the officer left. This time, I spoke to a different dispatcher, who listened patiently and promised to dispatch another unit. Again, an officer came. Again, a brief conversation. Again, a temporary lull, followed by an immediate, aggressive resurgence of the noise. This pattern repeated itself over the next few nights. Each time I called, the police would respond, but the Johnsons would simply wait for them to leave, then turn the volume up, often adding new layers of irritating noise, like booming shouts or the revving of a dirt bike engine they now seemed to possess. It felt like a sick game, one they were clearly enjoying and I was clearly losing. My detailed log grew thicker, a depressing chronicle of my invaded life. Dates, times, officer names, incident numbers, all meticulously recorded, but seemingly to no avail. The police, while sympathetic, seemed unable to enforce compliance beyond a fleeting, temporary measure. They explained the limitations of their power, the need for repeated violations, the slow process of formal complaints and citations. It was frustratingly bureaucratic, and the Johnsons seemed to be experts at exploiting these loopholes. My next move was to contact the Homeowners Association, if there was one, or the local community association. Willow Creek wasn't heavily HOA regulated, but there was a civic association that dealt with neighborhood disputes. I wrote a formal letter, attaching copies of my noise log, detailing the police visits, and explaining the profound impact the noise was having on our quality of life. I sent it certified mail, hoping the official nature of the communication would finally get through to them. A week later, I received a confirmation that the association had sent a stern letter to the Johnsons. For a single night, there was a noticeable decrease in volume. I allowed myself a fragile moment of hope. But the very next evening, the music returned with a vengeance, accompanied by more shrieking children, and what sounded like a large dog barking incessantly from their yard. They were clearly making a point. Letters, police, community associations, none of it mattered to them. They were immune to civility, to law, to decency. The problem wasn't just growing bigger, it was actively mocking me, personally. This relentless, grinding conflict began to take a severe toll on every aspect of my life. My peaceful home, once my refuge, became a source of constant anxiety. I found myself flinching at every sudden sound, anticipating the inevitable eruption of noise from next door. I couldn't relax in my garden. The quiet rustle of leaves was always overshadowed by the knowledge that at any moment the discordant bass would start thumping. My work, which required a calm, focused mind, suffered immensely. I found it nearly impossible to concentrate on designs, my hand shaking slightly as I drew, my mind replaying the previous night's torment. Deadlines loomed, and I fell behind, risking my professional reputation, something I had meticulously built over 2 decades. Sylvie, ever patient and supportive, tried her best to comfort me, but even she couldn't escape the oppressive atmosphere. Our evening meals, once a cherished ritual of quiet conversation, were now tense affairs, often interrupted by shouts or a particularly crude lyric echoing from over the fence. We found ourselves retreating indoors earlier and earlier, closing windows, drawing curtains, as if that could somehow block out the sound that permeated everything. We even considered moving our bedroom to the opposite side of the house, but the noise seemed to penetrate everywhere. I started losing significant amounts of sleep. My eyes were perpetually bloodshot, dark circles beneath them a testament to my exhaustion. I was irritable, quick to anger over minor things, a stark contrast to my usual calm demeanor. I found myself snapping at Sylvie, then immediately regretting it, apologizing profusely, but the stress was undeniable. I felt like a different person, a shadow of my former self, constantly on edge, constantly battling an invisible enemy that held all the power. The Johnsons, meanwhile, seemed to thrive on our misery. I would occasionally see them in their backyard, laughing, drinking, oblivious or uncaring of the torment they inflicted. Sometimes, I would even catch one of them looking over the fence towards our house, a smirk on their face, as if daring me to do something else, knowing I had exhausted all my options. Their contempt was palpable, a suffocating blanket that pressed down on me. The worst incident happened on our 23rd wedding anniversary. Sylvie and I had planned a quiet evening, a special dinner prepared together, followed by a glass of champagne on the porch, a tradition we held dear. We had managed to enjoy the cooking, the gentle clinking of pots and pans, the aroma of garlic and herbs filling our kitchen. We set the table outside, lit candles, and poured our champagne. Just as I raised my glass to toast Sylvie, the first blast of music erupted from next door, louder and more aggressive than ever. It was a particularly vile song, filled with graphic descriptions of violence. My hand froze. Sylvie's face, which had been soft and loving moments before, tightened with pain and disappointment. We tried to talk over it, to ignore it, to pretend it wasn't happening. But it was impossible. The bass thudded against our chests, the lyrics screamed at us, desecrating our special moment. I looked at Sylvie, her eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of sheer, utter frustration and exhaustion. "I can't do this anymore, Arthur," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the racket. "I can't. Our home, it's not our home anymore. We can't even celebrate our anniversary in peace." Her words, so quiet yet so profound, hit me harder than any of the Johnsons' music. It wasn't just my peace that was shattered. It was our asterisk peace, our asterisk sanctuary, our asterisk life together. The thought of selling our home, this beautiful place I had poured my heart and soul into, this place where Sylvie and I had built our life, started to creep into my mind. It was a desperate, humiliating consideration, a testament to how low I had sunk. Arthur Bennett, who prided himself on solving problems, on creating beauty, was utterly defeated by a group of crude, inconsiderate neighbors. I felt helpless, exposed, and vulnerable. All my careful efforts, all my attempts to resolve the situation through polite means, through official channels, had not only failed but had actively made the situation worse. The Johnsons reveled in my powerlessness, their noise growing more defiant with each passing day. I was at my lowest point, desperate for a solution, any solution, but unable to see a path forward that didn't involve either enduring endless torment or abandoning the home I loved. The peaceful, even-keeled Arthur Bennett, the man who preferred to take the nonsense rather than cause a fuss, was dying, replaced by a hollowed-out, deeply resentful version of himself. I was a man cornered, and the only way out seemed to be through a path I had always avoided: direct, unforgiving confrontation. The thought of revenge, once unthinkable, began to simmer, a dark, alluring whisper in the back of my mind. Act 3. They make a final attempt to solve the problem, which may succeed or fail. The consequence is not always as expected. The sight of Sylvie's tears on our anniversary was the final, unendurable blow. Her words echoed in my mind, a constant refrain. "Our home, it's not our home anymore." The elegant, serene woman I loved was being withered by the relentless assault from next door. That night, sleep offered no escape, only a churning cauldron of frustration and a nascent, unfamiliar resolve. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the distant thud of the bass a morbid lullaby. Every attempt at civility, every legal avenue, every plea for reason had been met with scorn, mockery, and outright escalation. I had exhausted the polite options, and they had, in turn, exhausted my patience and my very spirit. It was clear, then, The Johnsons operated outside the realm of polite society. They respected no rules, no boundaries, no peace. My carefully constructed world of calm and order had been shattered by their deliberate chaos. If they refused to play by the rules, why should I? A new thought, cold and precise, began to form in my mind, pushing aside the last vestiges of my mild-mannered self. The memory of their laughter, their arrogant sneers, fueled a slow-burning fire in my gut. I would fight fire with water, literally. For days, I observed them, a silent predator in my own backyard. I noted their routines, their habits. Their precious outdoor speakers, the very instruments of our torment, were always left outside, placed close to the shared fence line. At night, they would simply cover them with a flimsy plastic bin, as if that would protect them from the elements or from me. This was their Achilles heel, their vulnerable point. The image of those speakers, silenced permanently, filled me with a quiet, fierce satisfaction. My landscape architect's mind, usually occupied with creating beauty, was now meticulously planning an act of sabotage. I knew my garden, every inch of it. I knew the intricate network of pipes and nozzles that fed my irrigation system. It was designed for precision, to nurture my plants, but it could also be repurposed for a different kind of precision. My sprinklers. I remembered the Reddit story about a similar situation, and the idea, once a fleeting, desperate thought, now blossomed into a full-fledged plan. The existing setup wouldn't be enough. My sprinklers were designed to water my plants evenly. I needed a surgical strike. The next morning, I made a trip to the local hardware store, purchasing a few specialized sprinkler heads, the kind with adjustable nozzles that allowed for pinpoint accuracy and powerful streams. I also bought a small, collapsible fishing rod, an unassuming tool that could be used for a discrete purpose. I returned home, my heart thumping with a mix of apprehension and exhilaration. That evening, as dusk settled, and the Johnsons were inside, presumably eating their dinner before their nightly concert began, I went out into my garden. I removed the existing sprinkler heads near the fence line, carefully replacing them with the new, adjustable ones. Two of them I aimed directly at the precise spot where their speakers usually sat, ensuring a direct hit. The third I set to sweep a wide, 180-degree arc, covering a larger area near the fence, just in case anyone in their house happened to glance out and wonder why a single stream of water was attacking their speakers. The wide sweep would make it appear as though I was simply watering a section of my own lawn, providing a plausible deniability if questioned. I tested the spray patterns, adjusting the nozzles until the powerful streams of water arced perfectly, ready to deliver their destructive message. The plan was set. All I needed was the right moment. I waited 2 nights, allowing the music to grate on my nerves one last time, solidifying my resolve. Each thumping beat, each shouted lyric, only reinforced my decision. On the third night, the night of my vengeance, the weather played along perfectly. A light, misty rain had been falling all day, making the ground damp and the air cool. It was just enough to make a casual observer assume the sprinklers might be running for general garden maintenance. The Johnsons' music started precisely at 8:00 p.m., a full-volume assault as usual. Sylvie and I sat in the living room, trying to read, trying to ignore the vibrations through the floorboards. At 10:30 p.m., the music was still blasting, seemingly louder than ever. I felt a surge of cold fury. This was it. I kissed Sylvie on the forehead. "I'm going to take care of something, my love," I whispered, a glint in my eye she hadn't seen in weeks. She squeezed my hand, a silent acknowledgement of what was to come. I slipped on a dark jacket and pulled on a pair of garden gloves. I walked stealthily to the back of our yard, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The Johnsons' backyard was dimly lit. Their monstrous speakers, covered by the flimsy plastic bin, stood like dark sentinels near the fence. The bass thudded, vibrating the very ground beneath my feet. I activated my irrigation system, a low hum indicating the pumps were engaged. I heard the familiar hiss of the water beginning to flow. The new sprinkler heads near the fence hissed louder, building pressure. Then, the water jets erupted, powerful streams arcing into the night. My breath caught in my throat. This was the moment. I extended the collapsed fishing rod, the tip barely visible in the gloom. With a quiet, deliberate movement, I poked it through a gap in the fence, reaching out towards the speaker closest to me. I nudged the plastic bin. It was lighter than I expected, and with a soft clatter, it toppled off the speaker, landing silently on the damp grass. The other speaker's bin followed. Success. Now, the powerful jets of water from my adjusted sprinklers slammed directly into the exposed speakers. I could hear the distinct sound of water hitting plastic and metal, a steady, relentless deluge. I watched, mesmerized, as the water poured into the speaker cones, saturating the fragile electronics within. The powerful sweeping jet from the third sprinkler head arced over the general area, providing my alibi. I stayed there for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 10 minutes watching the water do its work. Then, with a silent, satisfied nod, I turned off the irrigation system. The hiss died down, replaced by the persistent, unyielding thrum of the Johnsons' music. I returned to the house, shed my wet jacket, and found Sylvie waiting. I gave her a small, knowing smile. "It's done," I whispered. We settled back onto the sofa, the music still blasting. But this time, something was different. I felt a profound sense of calm, a deep, quiet satisfaction settling over me. We waited. And then at exactly 11:17 p.m., mid-song, the music suddenly, abruptly cut out. Silence. A profound, beautiful, exquisite silence descended upon our house. It was so sudden, so absolute, that I almost held my breath, afraid to disturb it. Sylvie looked at me, her eyes wide, then a slow, beautiful smile spread across her face. We stayed there, bathed in the sudden, glorious quiet, listening to the crickets chirping, the distant hoot of an owl, the gentle hum of our refrigerator. It was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. The next morning, I woke to an unfamiliar sensation, 8 uninterrupted hours of sleep. My mind felt clear, my body rested. I brewed coffee, the aroma filling the silent house. Then, a sudden commotion from next door. Angry shouts, the sound of something being kicked. I walked to my backyard, sipping my coffee, and there they were. The Johnsons, all of them gathered by the fence, their faces contorted with rage. The 2 massive speakers lay on their sides, water pooled around them, clearly ruined. The plastic bins were scattered nearby. The burly man, the one who had laughed in my face, glared at me across the fence. "You!" he roared, his voice thick with fury. "You did this, didn't you, you old man?" He started spouting a torrent of angry, accusatory words, vulgar and incoherent, gesticulating wildly towards the drenched speakers. His wife joined in, her voice equally shrill, demanding to know what I had done, threatening me with police, with lawsuits, with vague, menacing consequences. Their words, in their rapid, angry English, were filled with venom. I simply took another slow sip of my coffee, observing their rage. I waited until they paused, momentarily out of breath from their tirade. Then I turned to Sylvie, who had just joined me, a faint, amused smile playing on her lips. "Mon amour," I began, my voice perfectly calm, a gentle smile on my face. NSC pas merveilleux devoir en fin un peu de paix. My love, isn't it wonderful to finally have a little peace? Sylvie's eyes twinkled. She looked at the Johnsons, who were now gaping at us, utterly bewildered by our sudden switch to French. Oui, chérie, she replied, her French accent lilting beautifully. C'est un silence si délicieux. Je crois que nos voisins ont enfin appris à erder un peu plus discrets. Yes, darling, it's such a delicious silence. I believe our neighbors have finally learned to be a little more discreet. We both shared a quiet, knowing laugh, a sound of genuine amusement that was utterly alien to the Johnsons' crude derision. Their faces reddened further, a mixture of anger and complete incomprehension. They didn't understand a single word we were saying, and that was the most poetic part of all. Their primary weapon of intimidation, their loud, aggressive English, was useless against us. They were left sputtering, unable to articulate their threats or their fury, while we spoke calmly, beautifully, in a language they couldn't penetrate. It was the ultimate, satisfying reversal. They continued to rant and rave for a few more minutes, but their words felt hollow, impotent. They eventually stomped back into their house, defeated, their ruined speakers a silent testament to their folly. The silence that followed was not just an absence of noise. It was a profound, restorative presence. Peace had returned to Willow Creek, to my home, to my very soul. The Johnsons, outdoor speakers, remained ruined, a permanent casualty of their own arrogance. They never blasted music from their backyard again. Perhaps they couldn't afford new ones immediately, or perhaps the fear of further, inexplicable accidents kept them from repeating their past behavior. Their children still screamed during the day, but without the booming music, it was merely annoying, not soul-crushing. And Arthur Bennett, was no longer the same man. That confrontation by the fence, that moment of shared, knowing laughter with Sylvie, had been a revelation. I had finally stood my ground, not with violence or crude words, but with wit and precise, poetic justice. The satisfaction was immense, a deep, abiding sense of fulfillment I had never known. The reputation I had carried for so long, that of the man who took a lot of nonsense, had been shed like an old skin. I felt a new strength, a quiet confidence that permeated every aspect of my life. My garden flourished once more, tended by a man who now walked with a lighter step, his mind clear, his spirit unbroken. I found joy in my work again, my designs flowing with renewed creativity. My sleep was deep and peaceful, and the irritability that had plagued me vanished. My relationship with Sylvie deepened, forged in the crucible of shared adversity and triumphant revenge. She looked at me with a new respect, a sparkle in her eye that told me she admired this transformed Arthur. The Johnsons remained next door, but their presence was no longer a torment. They were quieter, more subdued. I would occasionally see the burly man eyeing me suspiciously from his yard, but he never dared to meet my gaze, let alone confront me. Their family, it seemed, had learned a hard lesson about boundaries and the consequences of utter disrespect. A few weeks later, as I was working in my front yard, carefully pruning a rose bush, I saw a familiar sign go up in the Johnsons' yard. It was a for sale sign, crisp and new. My heart leaped with a quiet, triumphant surge of joy. They were leaving Willow Creek. The true, lasting peace I craved was finally within reach, not just the absence of their speakers, but the absence of their entire disruptive presence. I smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile. I had found my spine, not by becoming a bully, but by refusing to be a victim. My actions, though unconventional, had not only reclaimed my peace, but had seemingly prompted a complete exodus of the problem. It was the most satisfying twist of all. I continued to work on my rose bush, humming a tune, a landscape architect at peace in his restored sanctuary, knowing that sometimes a little water can cleanse more than just dirt.